I never expected to find myself trapped in a storm with my best friend's mom, but what happened that night changed everything. The way she looked at me, soft, inviting, and filled with something I couldn't explain, left me breathless. As the rain poured outside, the tension inside grew unbearable. And when our eyes finally met, I knew there was no turning back. I'm Alex, a 25-year-old graphic designer living just outside the city. Life had always been predictable: work, gym, and hanging out with my best friend, Jake. We had been inseparable since college, sharing everything from late-night study sessions to weekend road trips. But there was one part of Jake's life that always intrigued me: his mom, Rachel. Rachel was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. At 45, she had this effortless elegance about her. Long dark hair that framed her face perfectly and eyes that seemed to see right through you. But it wasn't just her looks. It was her presence. She radiated warmth and confidence, the kind that made you feel at ease, yet completely aware of her. Over the years, I'd spent countless afternoons at Jake's house. Rachel was always there, offering snacks, making jokes, and genuinely interested in what was going on in our lives. I often found myself lingering in the kitchen just to talk to her while she cooked or asked about my day. She made me feel seen, in a way that no one else really had. But I never thought much of it. I mean, she was Jake's mom, off limits, right? Then, one evening, everything changed. It started like any other day. I had just finished work and decided to swing by Jake's house unannounced. I figured we could hang out, maybe play some games and catch up. But when I knocked on the door, it wasn't Jake who answered, it was Rachel. Her face lit up the moment she saw me, and that smile? It made my stomach flip. "Alex, this is a surprise," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear as she stepped aside to let me in. Jake wasn't home, but Rachel insisted I stay and wait for him. Then, as if on cue, the skies opened up, and a sudden rainstorm trapped us inside. She laughed, shaking her head as she looked out the window. "Well, looks like you're stuck here for a while," she said, her voice light but with something more behind it, something I couldn't quite place. And from that moment, everything started to change. Rachel handed me a warm cup of coffee as the rain tapped rhythmically against the windows. The atmosphere inside was calm, almost too calm, given the way my heart raced every time our eyes met. We settled into the living room, and she sank into the couch across from me. She crossed her legs, her movements smooth and deliberate, and smiled softly. "So, how's work treating you these days?" I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept wandering. There was something different about her tonight. Maybe it was the way her sweater hugged her figure or the faint scent of vanilla and jasmine lingering in the air. Whatever it was, it made it nearly impossible to sit still. As we talked, the topics shifted from work to relationships. She mentioned how busy Jake had been lately and how the house had started to feel empty. "Sometimes I miss having someone around to talk to," she said, her eyes holding mine just a second too long. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the tension building in the room. "I'm sure Jake will be around more soon. You know how he gets caught up with work." She smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "It's not just that," she admitted. "Things change when people grow older. Connections fade, and suddenly, you're left wondering if you're really as important to someone as you thought you were." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I shifted in my seat, unsure how to respond, but she leaned back and gave me a look that made my pulse quicken. "You've always been such a good listener, Alex," she said. "It's nice to have someone who actually pays attention." I smiled nervously. "You're easy to talk to." The conversation felt safe, but underneath it, there was an undercurrent of something deeper. Every time her eyes lingered on mine, it felt like a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Then, almost as if testing the waters, Rachel reached out and brushed a piece of lint off my shirt. Her fingers lingered for a moment too long, and when she pulled away, her cheeks were slightly flushed. "Sorry," she said softly, but her eyes betrayed something else. Curiosity. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the sudden warmth spreading through my chest. "No worries," I replied, my voice lower than I intended. The rain outside grew heavier, and the dim light in the room made the space feel smaller, more intimate. Rachel stood and moved toward the window, staring out at the sheets of water streaming down the glass. "I guess you're really stuck here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Looks like it," I replied, standing and moving closer. She turned, and for the first time, I noticed the vulnerability in her eyes. It wasn't just the loneliness she felt, it was something more, something unsaid. "You're not uncomfortable, are you?" she asked, her voice gentle but searching. I shook my head. "Not at all." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us thickened, charged with an energy I couldn't explain but didn't want to resist. "Good," she said, her lips curving into a small smile. I knew then that this night wasn't going to be like any other, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I didn't want it to be. Rachel turned away from the window, but not before I caught the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity, maybe even longing. She sat back down, this time on the couch beside me, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You know," she began, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "I don't usually get this much uninterrupted time to relax. It's kind of nice." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, rain has a way of slowing everything down." Her gaze lingered on me, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "Do you ever feel like time just stops?" I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Sometimes." She smiled, but it wasn't the usual polite smile I'd seen 100 times before. This one was different. Knowing, teasing. Her eyes flickered down to my lips for just a moment, and I felt the air shift between us. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me, drawn back to her. She noticed, and her expression softened. "Alex," she said gently, "you're so easy to be around. It's rare to find someone who just gets it, you know." I nodded, my voice suddenly dry. "Yeah, I get it." She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my arm as she spoke. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just let go, forget expectations, forget what people think, and just feel." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, daring me to respond. "You mean like right now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, the tension that had been building all evening finally broke. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and she leaned into my touch. Her skin was warm, soft, and I felt her breath catch as my fingers lingered just a little too long. "Alex," she started, but whatever she was about to say disappeared as I leaned closer. Her lips parted slightly, and before I could think twice, I kissed her. It was tentative at first, almost unsure, but the second she responded, I felt the floodgates open. Her hand moved to my chest, gripping my shirt as she pulled me closer. I could feel my heart pounding, my pulse racing as our kiss deepened. Her fingers found their way into my hair, tugging lightly as if she'd been waiting for this moment as much as I had. We pulled apart just for a second, breathless. Her eyes searched mine, but there was no hesitation anymore, only need. "Are you sure about this?" I asked softly. Instead of answering, she leaned in again, her lips finding mine with even more urgency. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her into my lap as the storm outside raged on. The sound of the rain against the windows only amplified the intimacy of the moment. Every touch, every glance felt electric. Her hands wandered, exploring my arms, my shoulders, my back, and each touch sent a jolt through me. I could feel her breath against my neck as she whispered my name, and it was enough to make me forget everything. Jake, the consequences, the rules we were breaking. "Alex," she murmured, her voice barely a breath. "I've thought about this more times than I should admit." Hearing those words sent a wave of heat through me. I pressed my forehead against hers, my hands resting on her waist. "Me too," I admitted, my voice raw with emotion. She smiled, a mix of relief and desire, and leaned back, pulling me with her onto the couch. I could feel her heart racing against mine, and for the first time, I stopped caring about what was right or wrong. The room seemed to fade away. All I could focus on was her. Her touch, her warmth, the way she looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Her hands slid down my arms, her touch both gentle and deliberate. "You don't have to stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't. I leaned in again, capturing her lips in another kiss as my hands traced the curves of her body. She melted into me, and with each passing second, I felt the weight of the world slip further away. The storm outside raged on, but inside, everything felt calm, natural. Like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. For the first time, I stopped thinking about what might happen next and let myself get lost in the moment. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping, but inside, the air felt thick with heat and tension. Rachel's breath was warm against my skin, her hands lingering on my chest as she leaned back into the couch. "This feels insane," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt. Instead, I found something even more dangerous: certainty. "Do you want me to stop?" I asked, my voice low. Her lips parted, but instead of answering, she reached up and pulled me into another kiss. This time, there was no hesitation. It was raw, urgent, and consuming. I couldn't hold back anymore. Her hands slid down my arms, her touch soft but deliberate. My heart pounded as she pulled me closer, her body molding against mine. I could feel the heat radiating between us, the boundaries we'd both carefully maintained crumbling in an instant. But then, it happened. A loud knock echoed through the house, breaking the spell. We froze, our bodies tangled together as reality came crashing back. Rachel's eyes widened, and she pushed me back just enough to sit up. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "It's him. Jake's home." Panic gripped me as I scrambled to straighten my shirt. Rachel stood, smoothing her hair and pacing the room. The knock came again, louder this time. "Mom, are you home?" Jake's voice carried through the hallway, and my stomach dropped. Rachel turned to me, her eyes wild with fear and something else, regret. "You need to hide," she hissed, motioning toward the hallway closet. I hesitated for only a second before darting into the closet, pressing myself against the back wall just as Rachel opened the front door. "Jake," she said, her voice too high-pitched to sound natural. "I wasn't expecting you." "Yeah, the rain got crazy, so I thought I'd just come home early." His voice was casual, but I could hear the shuffle of his shoes as he stepped inside. From the closet, I peered through the slats, my heart hammering in my chest. Jake was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead as he dropped his bag by the door. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "You seem weird." Rachel laughed nervously, brushing her hair back. "Weird? No, I'm fine. Just wasn't expecting you so soon." Jake's eyes drifted toward the living room, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice the rumpled couch cushions or the 2 mugs sitting on the coffee table. "Is someone here?" he asked, his tone shifting. Rachel stiffened. "No, of course not. Why would anyone be here?" "Because there are 2 cups of coffee," Jake replied, stepping closer. My stomach churned as Rachel faltered. She glanced at the cups and then back at Jake. "I made one earlier and forgot about it, so I made another." Jake didn't look convinced. "Right." I stayed perfectly still, my pulse pounding in my ears as Rachel steered him toward the kitchen. "Come on," she said. "I'll heat up some leftovers for you. You must be starving." As soon as their voices faded, I exhaled, but the reprieve was short-lived. Jake's footsteps suddenly approached the living room again, and I froze. "Where's your phone?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What?" Rachel's tone rose an octave. "Your phone. I called you twice, and it went straight to voicemail." "Oh, it's in my room," she replied quickly. "I must have left it charging." I heard Jake's footsteps again, and this time, they were heading toward the bedroom. My heart stopped. Rachel must have realized it too because she stepped in front of him. Wait. Don't go in there. Jake paused. Why not? Because it's a mess. I was cleaning earlier, and it's just embarrassing. Jake's silence dragged on, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he stepped back. Fine, he said, but his voice was tight. I'm gonna go take a shower. Can you grab me a towel? Rachel nodded quickly, disappearing down the hall as Jake made his way to the bathroom. The moment he closed the door, I bolted from the closet, grabbing my shoes and heading toward the back door. Rachel appeared just in time to catch my arm. Alex, wait. I stopped, my heart still racing. This is insane, Rachel. He's going to figure it out. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw guilt creeping in. I know, she said. I didn't plan this, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. I swallowed hard, torn between the overwhelming urge to run and the magnetic pull that kept me rooted in place. What do we do now? Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with emotions I couldn't untangle. I don't know, she admitted. But we'll figure it out. Before I could say anything else, the bathroom door opened, and Jake's voice rang out. Mom. Where's the towel? Rachel let go of my arm and stepped back. Go, she whispered urgently. I didn't hesitate this time. I slipped out the back door, the rain soaking me instantly, but it didn't matter. My mind was too tangled in the events of the night, the tension, the passion, the guilt. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Rachel. I'm sorry, but I can't stop thinking about you. And just like that, I knew this wasn't over. The rain had stopped by the time I made it back to my apartment, but the storm inside me was far from over. My clothes were still damp, sticking to my skin as I paced the living room, replaying every moment of what had just happened. Rachel's text sat on my phone's screen, glowing like a beacon, daring me to respond. I'm sorry, but I can't stop thinking about you. I typed out a dozen replies and deleted them all. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words felt right. How could they? I'd crossed a line I never thought I'd even approach, and there was no going back now. The guilt hit me in waves. Jake was my best friend. I'd spent years building a bond with him, and in one night, I'd risked shattering it. But no matter how much I told myself it was wrong, the memory of Rachel's touch lingered, leaving me torn between regret and desire. I barely slept that night, and when morning came, the weight of everything settled in even deeper. I knew I couldn't avoid Jake forever, and sure enough, my phone buzzed with his name just after noon. Jake. Hey man, you free later? Got some stuff to talk about. My stomach twisted. Had he figured it out? Was this it, the moment my entire world fell apart? I stared at the message for a minute before replying. Me, yeah. What time? We met at a coffee shop near his place, and the second I saw him, I knew something was off. His usual easygoing smile was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that made my pulse quicken. Hey, I said, forcing a casual tone. Hey, he replied, sitting down and leaning forward. So, is there something you want to tell me? I froze. My mind raced, searching for an excuse, a distraction, anything to steer the conversation away from the truth. What do you mean? Jake's eyes narrowed. I don't know, man. You just seemed weird last night when I came home. And my mom's been acting strange too. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you mean strange? He shrugged, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. I don't know. Just different. Like she's hiding something. The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, I thought he could see right through me. But then he leaned back, exhaling heavily. I guess it's nothing, he said, shaking his head. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. Even if Jake didn't know the truth yet, it was only a matter of time. And worse, Rachel hadn't stopped texting me. Every message pulled me back in. Rachel, I can't stop thinking about last night. Rachel, we need to talk. Rachel, do you regret it? I didn't respond right away, But the truth was, I didn't regret it, not entirely. The guilt was there, heavy and suffocating, but so was the memory of how she made me feel. The messages kept coming, and eventually, I caved. I don't regret it. But I don't know how to handle this. Her reply came almost instantly. Rachel. Neither do I. But I don't want it to end. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. I knew I should end it, walk away before things spiraled even further. But the thought of cutting her off felt impossible. We started meeting in secret, short moments stolen between errands or late-night drives when Jake wasn't around. Each time felt riskier than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. And then, it all came crashing down. Jake showed up at my apartment one evening, his face pale and his jaw tight. I need to talk to you, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I barely had time to process his mood before he dropped the bombshell. My mom's been acting weird, and I found messages on her phone. My heart stopped. Messages? Yeah, he said, his voice low and sharp. From you. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Jake's expression shifted, hurt, disbelief, and then anger. Tell me it's not what it looks like, he demanded. I couldn't. The silence between us said everything. You're my best friend, he said, his voice breaking. How could you do this? I tried to explain, tried to tell him it wasn't planned, that it just happened, but nothing I said mattered. You're dead to me, he spat before storming out the door, slamming it so hard the walls shook. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the floor. It was over. My friendship, the trust I'd built, and whatever illusion of control I thought I had. Rachel called that night, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't. The fallout was worse than I imagined. Jake cut me off completely, and word spread fast. Friends started asking questions, and before long, the whispers turned into full-blown gossip. Rachel texted again, one final message. I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me. But forgiveness felt impossible, at least for now. I knew I'd made a mistake, one that cost me more than I ever thought possible. And as much as I wanted to move on, the damage was already done. The weeks that followed were a blur. Jake's words echoed in my head, cutting deeper every time I replayed them. You're dead to me. I tried reaching out, apologizing, explaining, but every text went unanswered. Eventually, I gave up. Rachel stopped calling too. Her last message lingered in my inbox, unread but not forgotten. I hope one day you can forgive me. Forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wasn't the one who had lost a best friend, who had thrown away years of loyalty for one reckless night. That was all on me. The guilt became my shadow, following me everywhere I went. Work felt meaningless. Conversations with mutual friends became awkward and forced. Everyone knew something had happened, even if they didn't know the details. I could feel their judgment every time I walked into a room. But the worst part. I missed Rachel. No matter how much I hated myself for what we did, I couldn't forget the way she made me feel. Seen, wanted, alive. And that terrified me. One night, after ignoring her messages for weeks, I finally replied. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I can't forget you either. Her reply came within minutes. Rachel, I don't want to forget. But maybe we both need time. Time. It was such a simple word, but it felt heavy. I wasn't sure if time would heal the wounds I'd caused, or if it would just leave them deeper. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started picking up the pieces. I focused on work, spent time with other friends, and tried to rebuild the parts of my life that had shattered. But no matter how hard I tried, some cracks couldn't be repaired. Jake moved out of town not long after, cutting ties completely. Seeing him go was like watching a part of myself walk away, and I knew I'd never get it back. As for Rachel, she stayed. We ran into each other once at a grocery store, awkward smiles, quick hellos, and then she was gone. But in that brief moment, I saw it, the same regret in her eyes that I carried every day. Looking back, I realized how easily emotions could spiral out of control, how loneliness and desire could cloud judgment and lead to irreversible mistakes. I wanted to believe there was a lesson in all of this. Maybe it was about boundaries. Or maybe it was about facing the consequences of your actions. What I did taught me that no matter how tempting something seems, the cost can be far greater than you expect. I lost my best friend. I lost trust. And no matter how much I told myself it was worth it in the moment, I'd carry that weight forever. Would I make the same choice again if I could go back? I don't know. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because some mistakes don't come with closure. They just linger, reminding you of who you were, and who you never want to be again. What would you have done in Alex's place? Could you resist the temptation, or would you let emotions take over? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your side of the story. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking and emotional stories like this. Trust me, you won't believe what's coming next.